So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone, and thanks again for attending the webinar today. We're really excited to show you some analysis from research we undertook with nearly 200 Latin American students enrolling at UK universities over the last couple of intakes. And really, I suppose, like any webinar, it's what is the value in this webinar and what information will you be able to take away from this session? Well, this is, of course, analysis from research, which will help you understand LATAM student motivations, which market students come from, and which courses they study. This will support you, of course, in your strategy and planning for Latin America. Can I ask everyone to mute themselves, if that's okay, before we go further?
Come together. We network and collaborate to create life-changing opportunities for our students. At Meta Plan.
Sorry, guys, I'm just trying to...
With the
Chris, hi, could you mute yourself, please?
Find the right candidates. To our Meta Plan.
Can you mute everyone, Jamie?
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so really what you're going to gain is this information that will support you in your strategy and planning for Latin America. And of course, we've got an added bonus for those of you that are still here at the end of the webinar. We're going to look through 7 ways to create sustainable engagement with partners as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you to Jamie, who's the director and co-founder at EDCO LATAM Consulting. We'll be presenting this webinar together. We aim to talk for no more than 30 minutes. We'd like to have 10 or so minutes at the end for questions. And of course, if anyone has a message, just a bit of housekeeping, if anyone has a comment, a message they'd like to leave us, then please leave that in the chat box, and we'll answer as many questions as we can in about half an hour's time. Thank you, everyone. Over to Jamie.
Thanks, Simon, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all, and thank you for your time and attending our webinar. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the discussion points. We're going to cover 4 things in this webinar. The first thing that Simon will talk over is motivations and Latin American students. Why do they want to study internationally, study abroad? I'll be going over some points about which countries that the students come from, and also a mix of undergraduate and postgraduate. That will be followed by Simon talking about our mix of direct versus agent partner student recruitment, which subject areas are the most popular. And again, we always talk about diversity in Latin America, which will be very interesting for you all to see. And then as a bonus for the webinar, we've got 7 ways to create sustainable engagement with our partners in Latin America. I'll be talking through just a couple of points, well, 7, about why and how we create sustainable engagement with our partners in the region.
Thanks, Jamie. So looking at student motivations, so we're going to go through, I'm going to list a few points here, but it's really interesting. So we actually asked current students, as Jamie's already mentioned, what we're going to go through is exciting analysis from nearly 200 student enrollments, and we can really look at the kind of programs they studied, which countries they came from, which will help and support us all. But then the first question, I suppose, is why do students choose to study in the UK, in Canada, in Australia, in other popular destinations? Well, what we're going to do is we've actually recorded a couple of our students for this part of the session. So we're going to let our students explain, and they'll probably be a lot more eloquent than me, but just looking at some of the key kind of reasons, of course, perceived quality of education. Now, Latin America, the number of universities that have actually gone up in the ranking is very impressive. The University of Sao Paulo in Brazil is now number 92 in the QS World Rankings. So, of course, and then we have University of Buenos Aires and other universities that have kind of gone up the QS rankings. However, we all know that the top universities are effectively, if you look at the top 10 QS rankings, 4 of those are in the UK, and then 5 are in the USA. We've got 1 European, and then, of course, we've got Canadian, Australian universities as well in the mix. So really, these are the kind of key reasons. I'm not going to focus on every single one of these, because what I'd like to do is turn our attention to the students who actually went. And I'd like to make a few comments after both of these testimonials from the 2 students. So we have Sandra, who studied at Queen's University Belfast, and we have Rachel, who actually studied at Ontario Tech University. So, and it's fascinating, their kind of stories. They're just commenting for a couple of minutes, each of them. Now, we have to say that Rachel's interview is in Spanish. So of course, as an added bonus, we can practice our Spanish. However, of course, there are subtitles. So Jamie, can we just put Sandra's on? Thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. How are you? My name is Sandra, and I am from Mexico. Right now, I am studying a master in leadership for sustainable development here in Queen's University. And I decided to come here because I don't know if you know this, but Queen's is implementing a lot of actions to become more sustainable, and it has the goal to reach net zero emissions. So I thought it would be nice to come here and learn from the people who is already taking action. The city of Belfast is very good for international students. I mean, there is like this student environment here in the city. There's a lot of nightlife. The cost of living is not very high as it could be in other cities. And I don't know, everybody is very friendly. And if you decide to live in a Queen's accommodation, right now I am living in BT1, it's in the city center, and it's a great place. I mean, it has everything you need to feel comfortable and to focus on your studies. And it's full of international students, so it's very easy to make friends. So I think deciding to come here and studying Queen's is a very good option, and you will not regret it.
So before we go through to Rachel's little testimonial, just some quick comments, and we can see that this was very focused. This particular university was focused on net zero emissions, and of course, the course in leadership and sustainable development was a course that actually is quite difficult to find in Latin America. So of course, what you find is, and we'll talk about this a bit later through the presentation, when you look at postgraduate level, there's so many specializations in all of the popular countries that Latin American students, that's very attractive because these courses don't really exist within many countries in Latin America. So we're going to move on to Canada now. We're going to have a testimonial from Rachel, who studied at Ontario Tech University. There are subtitles, as I mentioned, so yeah, we'll play this now.
Hola, mi nombre es Rachel, soy estudiante de Panamá y estoy terminando mi carrera de biotecnología farmacéutica en Ontario. Fue maravilloso, la verdad. Los profesores fueron muy amables y logré compartir con muchos compañeros en el campus, hacer muchas amistades que sé que van a seguirme por vida y fue una gran oportunidad, una maravillosa oportunidad. Más que todo porque tenía el programa que más me inspiraba, que era biotecnología farmacéutica, y sobre todo las oportunidades de tesis, porque un profesor en esta universidad está haciendo tesis sobre el tema que más me interesaba, que era biología molecular y clonación, y todas esas cosas me fascinan. Siento que en la comunidad de estudiantes hay muchos lugares para estar envuelto en el campus, hay muchos clubs y siempre puedes encontrar a alguien con quien charlar, siempre tienes ayuda, una mano que te extiendan una mano para ayudarte en cualquier oportunidad. Eso me encantó.
So it's really interesting, of course, and as I've said, the students sort of explained this more eloquently than I was able to about what their motivations were. And of course, Rachel had done meticulous research and had found that the thesis options in pharmaceutical biology at Ontario Tech University were obviously excellent for her. And alongside that, she'd obviously done her research and found that the student environment and the clubs and societies, like, of course, all of the universities that are represented on this call, are fantastic. So it's really looking at those points of differentiation in your proposition to attract those Latin American students. So I'm going to pass over to Jamie now, who's going to look at the enrollment analysis that we undertook with the students the last few intakes in the UK. So over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Simon. So some of you may have seen, but Simon had been posting part of this on LinkedIn, and it's been a really interesting process of going through all of our students from our partners studying in the UK and getting to some real analysis. And what's most important about this analysis, of course, is sharing it with the sector and giving added value for Latin America about how we use this in our strategic planning for our partners across the different countries that we operate in. So to take some analysis from this very briefly, you can see that we have our main markets, which for those that are seasoned professionals in Latin America wouldn't come as a surprise, but we really have our 4 main markets. Now, it used to be 3, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico, but actually now Peru is it's a country that is delivering strong growth for enrollments internationally. So now we have 4 key countries that are contributing to 74% of our enrollments over the cycles from September 2023, January or winter 24, and September 2024. So it's really interesting to have what we call the double-digit countries so strong in their recruitment and numbers. The other interesting part, it's a tale of 2 sides, is that there are secondary markets, and those secondary markets nearly make up 25% of our recruitment numbers. So one thing to really take from this data is, yes, we have our core countries, and yes, we have a majority of our strategic plan attributed to these countries, but actually you cannot forget the sum of the parts in Latin America, and this comes with diversity. We look at splitting our plans between the core countries and the secondary markets, because those secondary markets, as you can see, Panama, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Chile, Bolivia, they are making up a significant part of our recruitment and growing each year with enough focus. So it's a really interesting message to take from this in terms of diversifying strategic plans and how diverse Latin America really is. Programs, countries, students, it's all about the diversity. And also what's really interesting is looking at the undergraduate and postgraduate split. So you can see here that actually our postgraduate and undergraduate split, it's really nice to see a growing undergraduate market. You can talk many years ago, but Latin America was really, really known for a very, very dominant postgraduate market and very little undergraduate. But to now have almost 35% of our students coming at undergraduate level, and these don't include foundation numbers because a lot of them are private providers, and we couldn't get all of the data. But if we also added in foundation numbers to this number here, it would be higher. So you can really see that there's a growing undergraduate segment in the market. And that's how we are at EDCO planning our strategy. We're really focusing on enhancing our undergraduate activities, and this is showing in the numbers. So again, we have a diverse mix of countries. We have our core, but also our secondary markets. And we're also having a very clear picture of a growing undergraduate market, which is now playing a significant part and is no longer a purely postgraduate dominant region in Latin America. Over to you, Simon, for agent versus direct.
Thanks, Jamie. I mean, the key takeout here is that out of those students who enrolled, as we can see here, the last 3 intakes with our partners, we can see that actually, if you add up the percentage, it's 50% agent and 50% direct. So it's really important to have an agent strategy in Latin America. As you can see here, there's quite a variance between countries. So if we look at the difference, for example, between Colombia and Brazil, 2 of the key markets, we can see that Colombia is predominantly agent focused. Brazil up till now has been predominantly direct focused. The reasons for this, the rationale really is that Brazil, as we all know, is a big market. I can see there's some Brazilians on the call, and of course, fantastic agent network for English language, for short-term courses, and of course, growing with the number of agencies that are now becoming serious with higher education provision. However, Colombia has, for the last few years, is slightly more mature as far as helping support students go to higher education programs. And then if you look at Mexico, that's roughly, well, you can see here that that's 46% direct, 54% agencies. And then interestingly, you see where you have others. So we've got our core markets, and most of the key markets have a good agent infrastructure. And as I've just mentioned, some of those markets constantly improving, like Brazil, for example, but then others are 100% direct. So what we're saying is that there's room in Latin America to grow and to explore and to look at relationships in those markets outside. So we'd call these tertiary markets, really. If you look at your primary markets, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, as Jamie said, potentially Peru as well. You've got secondary markets, Ecuador, Panama, Bolivia, etc. But then you've got some markets which are, again, showing interest. And we've had, you know, ones or twos, some students coming from countries such as Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Argentina, Venezuela. So again, these are markets that in the future we can look to support with a strategy. But at the moment, most universities are focusing on the big three, followed by the others. Thanks, Jamie. So moving on to subject demand. This is fascinating. I always find this really interesting. Now, as many of you are aware, I lived in Latin America for 2009, from 2009 to 2022. I was always really interested when I got the list of students, having worked in an agency and then worked for a number of years for Into. I was very interested in where the students went, what they studied. And we can see here that at undergraduate level, this is slightly more traditional than postgraduate level. Undergraduate level, there's such a diverse range of subject interest that Jamie was alluding to. If we look at business management, is worth 14% of the total 100%. And then you look at, there's other programs, computer science, finance, accountancy, film, media. But apart from potentially business management and all the surrounding subjects, there's no clear trends. And if we were to look at this 2 years ago, or if we look at this chart a year in the future, we'd probably see some slightly different course areas. So what I really love about Latin America, and I'm sure everyone in the virtual room who's obviously been involved in Latin America, is there are you know, there's room for every single university to do well in Latin America if they have the right proposition, because whatever your course portfolio, there will be students looking for the courses that your institution offers. Now, if we look at postgraduates, thanks, Jamie, this is, as you can see, a lot more bubbles, and meaning a lot more diversity. And the difference really between undergraduate and postgraduate is that undergraduate students are predominantly focused on the traditional subjects, and then at postgraduate level, students will specialize. They'll go on to, as we can see here, energy sustainable development has quite strong demand. There's marketing, digital advertising, artificial intelligence, robotics. Naturally, sorry, Valentina, can you mute? Can we mute everyone, Jamie? I don't know how to do that. So.
You will have to do that.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. So we have also programs here that are kind of related to each other as well. So if you were to look at, for example, AI, and then you've got design innovation, those two often go together as well. So when you add up the percentages, then that actually comes to a larger percentage. And we can see international business and finance, for example, adding those two together, which often go together. So it's really interesting. And then you've got your humanities focused subjects as well, with the sort of 4% here, and then data analytics. So it's really interesting, and it's fascinating what a kind of large, diverse range of programs students from Latin America study. So I'll just introduce this quickly. What we wanted to do for the last sort of 8 to 10 minutes was, as a kind of bonus really, is talk about creating better engagement. What we've noticed is, with the partners we work with, and of course with the institutions we talk to, there's obviously a genuine interest in how do we maximize, how do we optimize these relationships we have in Latin America. So Jamie's going to run through 7 ways to create better engagement. At the end, if you could please start writing any questions or any queries you have. Of course, we'll have 5 to 10 minutes at the end to answer these. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give this as a bit of a bonus slide, really, because I think it's a common question we do get asked a lot, especially when we have partners that are looking to work with EDCO in the region and just interested in understanding the differentials. we've spent a considerable amount of time in the region, of course, and with our recruitment experience, we've sort of narrowed that down really to 7 ways that we feel are some of the most important. And what I wanted to do is just give a very quick summary, just a minute or so of each one. And of course, again, if you have any questions about creating sustainable engagement with LATAM partners, Simon will show the QR code at the end to perhaps book a quick meeting to discuss, how we use these and what the benefits are in the strategies that we have with our partners. One of the first things that we mention, and to many institutions, and actually something that isn't done as well as it should be, but it does obviously improve as work continues in Latin America, is a clear proposition. And we say this because a lot of the time, many institutions will visit Latin America and have, very thick prospectuses, have loads of different information in there. And to be really transparent, when Latin American students are looking for an institution, they want to understand quite clearly and quickly the proposition, and especially at undergraduate level with parents that are translating from the English language to Spanish or Portuguese. The idea of having a very clear proposition is really important for institutions because it helps the institutions stand out in Latin America. And as the market is becoming more popular and saturated in a way, that clear proposition is ever more important. So what we often advise our partners is when we have materials for events, for example, we say, just list 5 or 6 clear things about your institution that you feel would be most important for the student to understand. Is that the location? Is it the scholarships, or are there standout programs? Is it work experience that they'll receive? Is it their opportunities post-graduation? Is it student experience? There's always things that help institutions stand out, and we feel that these should be listed very clearly on just a 1-pager in the local language. And having just too much information saturating that proposition doesn't really work so well in Latin America. The next point that I'm going to go on to, and we mentioned this time and time again, is that Latin America is a relationship-driven market. If you come and visit, for those that haven't been to Latin America, you will understand this as soon as you get here, because everybody likes to talk to each other. It's the magic of the region. And with that magic, it's the same thing with recruitment, the same thing with helping students enroll at institutions. Their students, partners, parents expect this hand-holding experience because that's what the relationship building environment is in the region. So we always say that to create a sustainable engagement with any partner, any student in Latin America, you have to have exceptional customer service. And this comes with hand-holding. It takes a lot longer than many other regions to recruit a student or build a partnership in Latin America than it would do elsewhere, purely because 50% of that is relationship building and hand-holding. So we always say that have that in mind. It does take longer, but once you do get the student or the partnership built, it's long lasting and it really supports ongoing growth in the region. The third point, for me, one of the most important, and again, we always discuss this in terms of SLA for our partners, is quick response times. Latin Americans, when they are applying to institutions, from our experience, don't want to wait too long. And therefore, it's about finding that sweet spot. Too long, and they will choose another institution believing that they haven't been accepted. And actually, interestingly, too quickly, there's a bit of doubt about how genuine the offer is. So it's about finding that sweet spot. We usually say between 2 to 3 weeks of a response time is really, really valuable for an institution to respond to a student about whether they've been accepted or not. And again, the benefit of having somebody here, which we'll talk about in terms of local presence, is that keeping that student warm whilst the process is ongoing, even if it's only over 3 weeks, is vital to converting students to enroll at an institution. The next point is scholarships and innovative discounts. Of course, we understand the budgetary restraints for many institutions, in the current environment, but scholarships and innovative discounts are vital for Latin America. There's 2 points really to be made about this. One is that it is a region that does need financial support. There are many times where students think that they can go and study at an institution, especially in the UK, and then find that their currency is devalued within 2 weeks by 15 to 20%. It can happen. So scholarships are so important for students to secure their place, and it really is a necessity here. And the other part of this is that innovative discounts. We know that Latin Americans like to feel, or at least be shown, that their region is of importance. So what we often find is having a specific regional scholarship for Latin America works wonders. Even if it means repackaging a scholarship that might already be available and adding something additional and giving it to Latin Americans really does have a greater impact than having a wider scholarship that's just given to each student. It shows support, it shows that there's something innovative and direct for the region, and it really does help with conversion. And the final point I'll say about our experience in Latin America is that, you know, a discount is expected. So even if it's a smaller scholarship, giving something rather than nothing does help conversion, even if the student might not need it. It makes the student feel that they've achieved something above and beyond the acceptance, and really important to get students enrolled. One thing that, of course, we talk about a lot, which is EDCO, and our core offering is local presence. Having somebody here in the region goes hand in hand with the relationship building element of Latin America. It takes a long time to build relationships with partners, to build trust with students, and having someone here present all of the time to be that hand-holding person works wonders. And you know, the numbers for EDCO speak for themselves for our institutions, and we know that the local presence with local know-how and local language is fundamental in increasing student recruitment. That isn't to say the wonderful work that regional officers and managers do from afar, traveling over to Latin America, spending weeks on end here and working the recruitment process. It is fantastic, but that coupled with local presence is very powerful and works very well. The next point is holistic engagement. By holistic engagement, we mean include people above and beyond the international office. We have found, strategically speaking, and one of our key Canadian partners, using faculty members for webinars, and especially ones from Latin America that are teaching professors or involved in faculty in the institution, is phenomenal. It works so well, and we understand that the availability of course, professors and faculty members is not always, you know, there's not always that greater availability, but when you can get them on webinars and involved in that engagement, it really works very well. And the same goes for student ambassadors and alumni. Latin American students, yes, they listen to us that work for the institution, and yes, they understand, but to hear directly, and you can see from the videos how impactful that is, to hear directly from a student ambassador that's studying there, an alumni that studied there, and where are they now and what are they doing, is really powerful. And again, from one of our key Canadian partners, that strategy is working very, very well. And having groups where people that are accepted as the institution can connect with ambassadors is a real key selling point to get students over the line and enrolling at the institution. And finally, the last point is about tailor-made content and personalized marketing. And it's a short point, but very important, that having generic content for Latin America is not advisable. We understand that, of course, there are restrictions institutionally, and that nobody really wants to have 50 different personalized marketing materials in 50 different languages. And it's probably always easier to have one generic marketing material in English. But if you want to get the best out of Latin America, having that tailor-made content for Spanish and Portuguese speaking students in Latin America is one of the most important things that you can have ready before you engage in the region. We've seen it time and time again where there's just been generic information or generic material. And yes, it's great, it gives the students information, but again, it doesn't make the student feel special. If you can give something that's directly targeted to Latin America, and actually by country, which is what we help our partners do, by country or key countries that you're recruiting in, this really ensures that students feel engaged, they feel that it's personalized, direct to them, the parents understand it, the students understand it, the partners understand it, and it really helps with conversion and recruitment in Latin America. So hopefully a very quick whiz through 7 ways. Again, we go into much more detail about this when we work with our partners, and it's built into our strategic plans. But we feel that these are some of the most sustainable ways to engage with Latin American students, to Latin American partners. And by partners, of course, we're talking about agents, we're talking about sponsors, we're talking about school counselors, we're talking about embassies. So all of those things combined, these are really the things that you should have in mind when engaging in Latin America.
Thanks, Jamie. That nearly brings us, we've just got a quick slide on EDCO LATAM Consulting. Many of you have heard about us, but effectively our purpose is to create life-changing opportunities for Latin American students through our partnerships. We've been in Latin America since 2019. We'd love the opportunity to be able to speak to you, to be able to support your Latin American strategy. Are you okay to move on to the next slide, Jamie? Because I have a bit of an ask on the next slide. This one. So we'd love your feedback. So look, it's just a bit of a quick ask. If you click on this, if you scan the QR code, there's a questionnaire quickly, and we'd love to hear your feedback. If you have any suggestions for future webinars, it's just really important to us to, of course, have the right information for next time. So I'm going to leave that on there for a minute or so. Whilst that's up there, and whilst if you could just potentially just answer some questions now, that would be amazing. But are there any questions? I can't see any questions in the chat box, but are there any questions for anyone? Would anyone like to raise their hand? Your QR code has been deactivated. I'm sorry about that, Carl. That we tested it yesterday. So that's, I apologize. That's
Simon, if you can post the link in the question box, then if everyone on the link, that will work as well.
I'll have to get back because that was a bit of an unknown. Of course, things can always go wrong when you don't expect them to. It was perfect yesterday, Cole, so I apologize. Hopefully the next link will work, which is actually a link to the calendar. If you wanted to book an appointment with myself, then that would be, then obviously feel free at any stage to book a meeting with me, and we're here to help support and guide you in Latin America. So if there is a question here from Sophie.
From Sophie.
It's really nice to see you, Sophie, and I hope you're doing well. I saw you come into the chat room, so fantastic. How much does geopolitical issues impact students?
Great question.
In what country? It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I mean, geopolitically, obviously, is such a kind of topical area at the moment. And I mean, I think that just very briefly, in the interest of time, Sophie, what's happened in Latin America has been a big shift, of course, in the last 2 to 3 years to the left from the right, if we look at many of the governments. And this has kind of, I suppose, kind of come with some possible constraints that students have when they're looking to apply, sometimes possible opportunities. In Latin America, students, there has been, of course, with all the IRCC change of regulations in Canada, there has unfortunately naturally been a drop in numbers going to Canada, and we've had to kind of look at reworking the strategy and ensuring that we do the best we can to optimize those students going. Sophie, as far as other destinations, of course, UK continues to be in a strong position, and of course, students have many opportunities that potentially don't in other countries. What I would say is that geopolitically, not just geopolitically, but in interest of demand, what we've noticed is that there's growing demand for other markets such as Europe, and students also, Sophie and others, applying. There was in research that came out from Bridge U actually that supports this, that students are applying to more destinations now. So it's really interesting because the number of applications are going up, so the number of applications are generally going up to UK universities, what we found, but conversion rates potentially are falling, why it's really important to have the regional representation as students are applying to more universities. I hope that answers your question. It wasn't an exact answer, but of course, Sophie, be really happy to talk to you more. There's a question from Joe. I don't know if you want to take this one, Jamie.
Sure. I just say, Sophie, that political situations in different countries, it depends on the student really, but we do see impact. Looking at the US, for example, we haven't seen data yet, but I am assuming that because of the political situation and new president, that there will be probably a downturn in students that would look to study at the US. Because of just general, I guess attitudes towards maybe immigration and those types of things. So it does have an effect, but we don't have the data to look at what the direct correlation is to student recruitment as yet. But just from, an anecdotal perspective, speaking to students, some would say, oh, I don't want to now go to the US. My options are, UK and Canada for these reasons. So it does have an effect, but as Simon said, politically as well in Latin America, those things that are happening domestically have a bigger impact on students going to study abroad. Joe, thanks very much for that message. It's a really good question. It depends really on the governments. So most of the governments in Latin America, well, I say most, but many do publish where their research or I guess their interests are for the country, and then that usually is linked to public funding for students to go and take a master's abroad. So if we take Mexico for an example on sustainability, there is historically they had, before this presidency, I think it might have been two before, they did have a big push for sustainable engineers, and therefore they were funding through I can't remember which funding body it was, but they were funding students to go and take those subjects, study abroad, and pay for that outright. So the issue is that there are trends that the government of each country will say, we need these people to do these jobs, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to the funding that they'll give because funding's being cut. So I think it's really interesting to know where the employment shortages are and where students would want to come and study and what they could do when they go back to their own country, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to funding, would be my...
Also, Jamie, what I've noticed, I was back in Colombia in November, and there is a big push generally, again, it's anecdotal really, but there, of course, big data, AI, the kind of technological type subjects, if we look at where we are now, Joe, and the increase in those areas as well as sustainability, which is very topical in Latin America and has been for the last few years. So if we look at kind of increase in, I suppose, tech related areas, AI, but then alongside that, the traditional subjects have not fallen off in demand. We can see that business, I mean, I studied business, 30 odd years ago, business management, finance is still very popular. So you've got, I suppose, two different areas, Joe, where the traditional subjects continue to be popular, but there is this push for the kind of tech AI sort of focused subjects, which I've noticed and has been apparent in what some of the kind of postgraduate students are studying. So, of course, Joe, we can chat more about that because we can probably drill down a little bit.
There is guidance from the government in most Latin American countries. Sorry to go back around the house again, but they do give guidance about where the job shortages are. The challenge that you find is that sometimes those shortages, working, in those roles, don't offer as such opportunities for students that would outweigh the cost to study internationally. And I think that's also where there's a challenge. So you may say, well, actually, we can see that in, Colombia, there's a shortage in this area. We should start targeting students for those shortages. But actually, does that translate to them earning well enough and almost repaying what they've studied in the UK to then come back to their home country? So it's one to watch out for. But I'd say that there is guidance from each of the governments, or many of the governments from the country we operate in, about where those employment shortages are.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for attending today. Really appreciate it. We've probably got time for one more question. We aim to finish in about 3 minutes or so. But it's been a really, I hope that you found this useful. And of course, we'll be back in touch with other webinars that we're running in the near future. So it's really great to see you all. Thanks ever so much.
Does anybody have any other questions?
Thanks, Fabio. That's great. Thanks, Chris. It's so
nice.
Thanks,
everyone. It's been great to see you all.
All right. Cheers, guys. Thanks, Jeremy. Cheers, mate.
Thank you.